Well, I will start with a quick update. Some exciting news that our office has been in the process of hiring for 2 positions. One brand new position, a planning and policy specialist, and one sort of a revised role of a vacancy that we've had. And we are getting very close to making an offer on both. So there'll be 2 new members of our team here shortly. So I just thought I'd share that, and we'll definitely introduce them once we do an official offer, introduce them, of course, to everybody here. Any other updates people want to share?
I guess I'm hesitating, Lisa. I think I'll just wait till we hit whatever agenda item it is useful for me to talk about. Conversations with Anna Mori of late, the back and forth dialogue on resolution and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, we could do that at the beginning. We're going to be spending most of the time today on governance structure for this committee in particular. So it might be good to do that at first. But Martin, did you have an update? Thought I saw your hand up.
Just one minor update. We're just getting our ducks in a row for our Salmon Safe certification. So we're having them on campus next week. And then, yeah, so that's our only little update.
Okay, that's great. Well, maybe Lou, you can go and I'll just give a quick overview, because I think there is a lot of crossover with folks on this committee and the Environmental Stewardship Committee, but not everybody is on both or attends both meetings. So just to bring people up to speed, you know that we've been working for quite a while on air travel. And then we've had an air travel working group over the last 9 months to a year, really working intensely on trying to address that as the university's 3rd largest source of emissions. And they developed a memo with a proposal that we actually voted on whether or not we would move forward that proposal to the exec's office for review and comment. And so we actually took our first vote last week as the Environmental Stewardship Committee did, and voted to move that forward for socializing the concept of an air travel program to reduce emissions. So, and I'll turn it over to you, Lou, for any updates that you want to share on that.
Yeah, just real quick. Before we voted, there was some language in the memo that's going to go into the executive office with this proposal that I had a hard time with, because it had not socialized at the level of detail that I feel comfortable with Anna Mori that this was coming. I have been talking about air travel policy and other sustainability decarbonization initiatives with the front office for a while. But I wanted the time to socialize what our current actions were, and that this memo was coming before, give her some time to respond and provide feedback, and just get some heads up before it was launched. So we changed the date to like the early part of February, and I have already socialized with it with a generally favorable understanding of the direction that we're headed. And when we're ready, week after next, we'll forward that on to Anna Mori.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Lou.
That's great news. Thanks, Lou.
You bet.
Okay. So if there aren't any questions on air travel, any other updates? All righty. So why don't we get going here with sharing, if I can find it. Damon, I may have to have you share it after all.
All right, I can do that.
I need to update I think I need to run some updates. I'm having some issues with this. Thank you. All right.
Do you see that full screen, the full screen slide?
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks. Okay, so I think you can move to the next one, Damon. So So I wanted to spend a little bit or spend our meeting today talking about governance structure of this committee, the Sustainability Action Plan Executive Committee. I know it's something that I've brought up and we've talked about a little bit in past meetings, but we're getting very close to really the front end of revising the Sustainability Action Plan. And I also think it's just we're at that point where we really need to take a hard look and see if there's a different or a better way to organize ourselves and move things forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think our current structure looks like, a different approach, which really centers around working groups. And I have a few examples that I actually took from the ASHE conference this fall, where the UC system and MIT both had some really good examples to share of how they do their governance. And it was comforting to me, in case anyone was wondering, we're not the only university or institute of higher ed that is struggling with how do you organize yourselves and what type of governance do you put in place, especially at really big universities. And UC was, you know, a system-wide approach for their 12 campuses. So, okay, I think we can go to the next one. So I wanted to just put a visual. This was my best attempt at what I think our current governance structure looks like. So we have, if we start over at the left-hand side of your screen with the Environmental Stewardship Committee, that's sort of this overarching committee that has a charge from the president to really oversee the implementation of the Sustainability Action Plan, development and implementation, and as well as to serve in an advisory role for what sustainability initiatives, whether that's policies, programs, goals, and targets that the university should set sort of organization-wide. And then underneath that, we have this committee, the SAP Executive Committee, which I think of as more of a boots on the ground, very much connected to the action plan itself in developing the content of that plan, as well as the implementation and making sure that we're tracking our progress and being accountable to the larger UW community. So that's what I've tried to convey over there on the left-hand side in the brackets. Our office at the bottom is facilitating in a facilitation role with both of the committees and the plan, and sort of leading that work across different colleges, units, and faculty, staff, and students. Part of what we do as an accountability measure is an annual report to the Board of Regents. And that encompasses, does and should encompass all of the items that fall under that bigger sustainability umbrella, but with a big focus on the Sustainability Action Plan. And then above us, Lou is the chair of the ESC, as well as this committee. And, you know, he's obviously got a direct line up to the administration with the president's office and the Board of Regents. And then while this, the right-hand side with the sort of the faculty side of governance is something that I think has sort of evolved as we've been learning together. How do we move new policies or new initiatives forward? And so we've got this dotted line, because Lou, I know you're the designated staff member, right, from facilities on FCUPS, the Faculty Council of Campus Planning and Stewardship, and then that's a subcommittee of the Faculty Senate. But for a lot of the bigger policy initiatives or sort of bigger university-wide goals that we've brought forward, we've been working across that sort of line of bringing it to faculty as well. So does that jive with everybody as far as your understanding of sort of where we're at with our current governance structure? Okay.
Lisa, I just have a point of clarification, and I think this is entirely my ignorance. But can you confirm that the Faculty Senate has a dotted line to the president and a direct line to the board? Is that it? I'm assuming that's accurate, but it surprises me.
I might be wrong on that. Actually, I'm glad you brought it up, Pam, because I wasn't sure myself. Does anyone know for sure?
The Senate doesn't have a direct line to the Board of Regents, as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I was going to say, I think we should ask someone like John Schaufelberger, but I don't think he knows anything about the Faculty Senate.
Yeah, he wouldn't know. Yeah.
I believe the chair of the faculty senate does sit at sits at the table at board meetings. So I don't know if maybe there is a direct line or not. So
It's true that any Senate stuff actually has to go through the Board of Regents for final approval. So, as whether that's a direct or indirect line, it's a good question, but I guess it's true because Anamari doesn't hold sway over faculty Senate stuff. She advises, so the dotted line makes sense there. So maybe it is true because of that final say by the Board of Regents that the Senate has a direct line.
Yeah, that should be easy to verify. Either online, there's faculty senate stuff that we can look at.
Yeah, we can verify that. Thanks though, Jim, that's helpful. Okay. So I think we can move on to the next slide. So one of the things that I've mentioned about changing, or that I think would work perhaps better, we'd need to try it out, but with the governance structure of this committee is the introduction of topical area working groups, which I'll get into a little bit of on the next slide, as well as meeting cadence. So this committee has, as I understand it, traditionally met monthly. And what I guess I've heard and also observed is that I'm not sure that that's working as well as intended. I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of the Sustainability Action Plan, whether it's implementation or developing, what should our strategies be? What should our actions be? And I think organizing ourselves a little bit differently would work better. So I'm essentially proposing that the committee, this executive committee, meet quarterly, and that we meet a month or so before the ESC meetings, so that we have sort of news or updates to bring to them. And then we would try introducing topical area working groups that would meet monthly. And those are sort of the, we're doing the boots on the ground work, whether it's, figuring out how we move from disposable packaging at football games to reusables. I'm throwing out examples here. Those are the kinds of things I'm envisioning with the topical area working groups. And next slide, please, Damon. So sort of zooming into that structure, we have this committee really taking the reins on the Sustainability Action Plan. And we have the idea is that this Sustainability Action Plan is covering a lot of different topics under the sustainability umbrella for the university: energy, purchasing, water, waste, etc. This isn't meant to be an all-inclusive list, but currently we're organized by target in the plan. And I really do think we're going to be doing a big restructure of the plan, and we may not necessarily be organizing working groups by target. I don't know that yet, but this makes a little more sense to me in terms of organizing ourselves around different topic areas. It may not always be super neat just because some of these overlap each other, but I think it will be a little bit easier to get stuff done. And then over on the left-hand side, this was my attempt at sort of taking 3 themes or 3 focus areas that we really want to infuse throughout any work that we do on any of these topics. So whether we're talking about green building or water or waste or wellness and well-being, how do we expand campus as a living lab opportunities on those topics? How do we expand learning and research on those topics, as well as obviously sustainability and equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion? So, any comments on this so far?
Lisa, do you envision that the members of these working groups would be all people from the SAP Executive Committee?
Maybe and maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people with, as we start to get into people's areas of expertise around food service, around green building, I think we'll have to recruit new members. I think just for sort of continuity and understanding of what's going on, it may be helpful to have some of these committee members be on these working groups, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary either. Okay, next slide, please. So again, this is sort of spaghetti.
Oh, I was just gonna say Jan just raised her hand in case you missed it.
Oh, thanks, I missed it. Go ahead, Jan.
Hi, I just thought I would add really quickly, like the categories or something like the categories you laid out for topics could allow you to tap into much greater faculty expertise across the campus. Like there are groups of faculty who really do work specific to green building or wellness and well-being or clean energy, for example. And it could allow for a more broad-based, expertise available to the team and the expertise available to the planning effort too.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate that. Okay, so the next question I wanted to put out in front of the group, and again, this is all sort of spaghetti on the wall for people to start digesting, but what would be the charge, or what would these working groups really do? And I've sort of started with 3 categories. So we're gearing up to update, revise the Sustainability Action Plan. It may look very different than it does now, just in terms of organization. But we have a lot of planning and target setting to do. So, if we have a group that's going to be our working group on waste, what do we want our waste reduction target to look like for 2050? And then what do we want some of those interim targets to look like in 5-year increments, since we're updating this plan in 5-year increments? So that's sort of one of the charges. And then it's also thinking about what are some of the priority strategies and action items for us to be able to get to those targets as a university. With any of that comes identifying some of the barriers and needs. And I think this is, taking things a step further, and it may be for the action plan, sort of not a super high level, but high-ish level stream of work, stream of barriers and needs. And then, over time, as we work on implementation, there might be some, strategic plans that, or, data and analysis that need to happen for some of these topic areas. And then also identifying the deliverables. So if we're moving towards a greenhouse gas emissions target of, decarbonization by 2050, what are the deliverables working backwards that we would need? And, to a large extent, that's already happening with Campus Energy and Utilities and the consultant team they've hired. But, if we think about all the other categories, a lot of that's work is yet to be done. And I think I saw, Jan, you had a comment here. Is the decarbonization? Oh, okay. I think it depends how we sort of set up the topical working groups, but I would think we'd probably want to separate, it would make sense to separate scope 1 decarbonization, combustible fuels, from like scope 3, like upstream emissions.
I was just ruminating on your previous slide because one possibility could be that the through lines, so campus as a living lab is a through line that you're suggesting, right? Like decarbonization could be a through line across the working groups too.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So yeah, we'll make note of that. And I know that is one of our guiding principles for the current plan, which I think makes sense. Okay. So that's sort of the planning and target setting. Then there's actually implementing the plan. So after we have a wonderful adopted 2025 plan, then we got to go out and make it happen. So the working groups would be working on those actions and deliverables that are identified in the plan and tracking our progress. And then there's the accountability and reporting piece. And that's where I think the working groups sort of reporting quarterly to this committee. And then that's a month ahead of the ESC. I think it rolls up pretty nicely, or at least it should roll up pretty nicely. And so that's a way that we can track how are we doing on our annual action items, And then how are we doing as far as those milestones, 5-year milestones toward the 2050 goal? Next slide. So this is also some spaghetti on the wall, but attempt at a working group structure. And while I would say this isn't all that different than what we have or have attempted to do currently with the working groups or the action owners by target, this would be sort of taking that idea, twisting it a little bit, and applying it to topic areas. So I think we'd have a co-leads, 2 leads for each topical area working group, and I think it could be a mixture of staff, and would love to get student, especially folks who are on the new Student Sustainability Advisory Committee that we've proposed. It hasn't happened yet, but that we've proposed. I think that would be a great opportunity for them to connect and engage on the SAP. We'd have to recruit people, but I think to Jan's point, we have experts on every imaginable topic at the university and super smart people. So I'm very optimistic that we wouldn't have trouble recruiting for some of these working groups. A monthly cadence seems appropriate to me. So that's what I've thrown out there. And then I think this committee would be developing some sort of expectations or guidelines around what are some of the deliverables that we want from your working group, giving a little more guidance and specificity. And hopefully there's some consistency. I think there would be some consistency across all those working groups. And then quarterly progress tracking. I have an example from MIT in here. Forget if it's the next slide or a few down, but I really liked what they were doing. So I'll show you that in a second. Okay, next slide. So I did, I stole this as an example from the UC system-wide presentation that I was at back in the fall. This was a working group. They have a similar structure, by the way. So I'm not taking credit for this. This is what UC does. This is also what MIT and many other universities do. They're organizing around working groups. UC's system is so big with the 12 campuses that they wanted continuity across them. So this was their fossil fuel-free task force. They set up 7, sort of guidelines around 7 areas that they wanted them to address as they move their campuses off of fossil fuels as their major source of heat and hot water. And they structured it in a sprint way. So they wanted to be able to relatively quickly get a working group together, work for sort of a shortened but intense period, and get all of this stuff figured out as best they could. And then, sort of that working group wasn't retired, but it would just go back to meeting monthly. And this in particular was, they wanted to set up some structure for the system-wide approach. So that, I'm not going to read this, but it just gives you a feel for what they were able to accomplish in relatively, a month or 2 with each of these topic areas. And they're also, aggressively pursuing transitioning off fossil fuels as a system. Okay, next slide. This is the same example or same UC system-wide example, but their task force put together some common deliverables around how are we going to approach decarbonization across our 12 campuses. So they have a strategy for 90% or greater reduction in scope 1 emissions from fossil fuel gas in all of their energy systems. They wanted, and this is for the working groups that would be at each of the campuses, so UC Santa Cruz, UCLA, et cetera. They wanted a high-level estimate of total capital and operational costs and savings. They wanted to make sure they included equity and identified a just transition, who would be impacted positively, who would be impacted negatively, et cetera, et cetera. They had them document gaps, studies, and analyses that they needed for net zero planning. And then also, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, I just watched the UC presentation, but the 5th one was identify opportunities, gaps, et cetera, engagement activities for research and education. So that's that, you know, to use Jan's terminology, that through line, if we're really trying to connect what we're doing on campuses, particularly with this, you know, this being an major infrastructure project, what are the Living Lab learning opportunities? What are the research opportunities? So I liked that aspect of this, of how they did it as well. Yeah, Steve.
Lisa, do you have examples of like these work products? And I think also the, I guess from the last slide, the sort of sprint work products, just, we don't have to go into that now, but I think that'd be helpful for this group to understand, you know, sort of level of effort. Everybody has their job and, you know, certain bandwidth and expertise, and, you know, to what degree were those efforts supplemented by, you know, staff effort supplemented by help of some sort, you know, consulting or otherwise?
That's a great question. I can get that info. And I think I think in some cases, I know the UC system asked for, I want to say, a sizable amount of money. I want to say they had $12 million or something, and that got distributed to all the different campuses for some of the, you know, the engineering study, the analyses. But that's a great suggestion. I can ask.
Thank you.
Ask for some of the products deliverables. Okay. I'm not seeing other hands. If there are, just interrupt me. Okay, next slide, please. So this is an example that we're already working on. That's sort of that next level of work stream that may or may not be sort of birthed out of working groups, which is, you know, we have Campus Energy and Utilities and Facilities taking the lead on getting the power plant off of fossil fuels. But if we're really on a university wide path to get to carbon neutrality or totally decarbonize our operations, there's still a lot of other areas that are generating emissions that we need to address and get into the weeds on. So, you know, we've got getting close to a final version of a zero carbon roadmap. And then below that is a little bit more in the weeds on the zero carbon work plan. So if we think about Tacoma and Bothell and medicine and housing, there's a lot of strategies that we would need to implement working backwards from 2050. And that goes hand in hand with capital budget requests and operating budget requests. So I bring this bring this out as an example because I think if we're talking about water, we'd probably have something similar to achieve our water goals. Similarly with waste, green building, et cetera, even in curriculum, you know, what do we really want sustainability curriculum and learning to look like as we integrate it across our tri-campus? All right, next slide. Oh yeah, this is a little tough to see. I can send a bigger version to you, but I thought this was, you know, a good example of how MIT is tracking their progress. They had a lot more working groups than I had proposed or am proposing for UW. I need to connect with their sustainability director. I'm not totally sure how they stay on top of as many working groups as they have, but this was kind of nice. So if we look at the first example for building efficiency, they have sort of how are they doing in terms of progress on the discovery phase? How are they doing in terms of progress on the implementation phase? And then the deliverables phase. And they have their annual milestones there. And my understanding is that their goals and targets for each of these working groups or each of these line items is, you know, further defined in their plan. So I didn't include all of that, but it's a pretty easy visual and also something that rolls up, I think, pretty well if we're trying to keep people updated on our progress. Next slide.
Yeah, I'd just say something simple like that on one page shows a lot of initiatives, but is easy to, it's easy for us to convey and communicate to a wide audience. We got a lot of stuff going on. There's a little bit on the progress. We don't need to dive deep, but I think something like this could be really helpful as we get further into our action plan.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Okay, so I wanted to just outline what an example working group might look like for us. So I think oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ben, didn't see your hand.
Yeah, can you go back to that slide? I agree with Lou that something like that could be helpful. One of the questions I had, Lisa, is whether or not you saw good examples of where it seemed like in our last sustainability action plan, we had a few areas where they were everybody and nobody's in terms of accountability. And we thought it was important to put the goals, because I was part of that process, to put the goals out there. But it was really a miss because we didn't have the people who would own implementation or invest in implementation at the table, which is maybe a mistake in hindsight. And I wonder if any of these, there's discovery, implementation, and deliverable. I wonder if there's, some measure or way of tracking whether or not you actually have buy-in from the right decision makers. Because it's one thing for a committee of people like us to set a goal for someone else to do, but it's another thing for that person to be involved in the goal setting and that unit to be involved and directly connected with the process or the task force or whatever unit, whatever unit you decide to create to implement and move this forward. I just wondered if you saw any good examples.
Yeah, good question. What I saw with both MIT and the UC system, which I think this sort of gets at your question, but I'd be interested in talking with them to learn a little bit more, is both of them had a president that really was this was a huge priority for the president, and convened this, in the case of UC, a UC system-wide, tapping the UC system-wide sort of executive order, tapping all of the VPs, all of the key leaders and decision makers across the university, and said, we're doing this thing, we're creating these working groups, and you are responsible for, if you're the president at UC Santa Cruz or you're the president at UC Berkeley, for making sure that these work groups are formed and making progress at your campus. And a similar thing happened at MIT, but I think what I hear your question is, and I think I'd have to talk with them to learn more, is when you get to sort of that campus level, and then you're trying to find people that have expertise on a working group subject, how do you ensure that there's follow through? Is that what you're saying? Both buy-in and
that there's representation in defining the goal, which hopefully creates the buy-in to implement the goal. If they're, uniquely the decision makers to make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and we'd have to, it's important. It's something that we would need to figure out. Is there a good sort of system in place, or is there a system approach that we could use for that? Or would we use folks on, sort of both the ESC and this committee to help ensure that if you have expertise in your unit, or whether it's HFS for food service, sustainable food service, or a college of nutrition, how do we get some people to commit to following through?
Yeah, I see Jan's comment about an implementation team. I don't know if we just make sure that all of the task forces have implementers on them from the outset, so the goals get set accurately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great points. Uh-oh. Did I lose everybody? Oh no, there we go.
No,
okay.
We're here.
my screen went black for a second. So great points. And I think it's something that we can spend some more time thinking about, and trying to make sure we're set up for success. Okay.
And just Lisa, Jan was putting a few things in the chat to make sure you saw that.
Yeah, Jan, do you want to comment on these that you put in the chat? I think these are good suggestions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to set up for success with implementation, but they all have to do with putting the people who could, could either be champions of or have the potential to block implementation on an implementation team of some type. And they could be integrated across the working groups either through liaisons, which is kind of personnel, a heavy lift for personnel, or they could be integrated in a way that has them conduct review cycles with the working groups on their products. And I don't think we had, I mean, we had some ideas on the original sustainability action plan of like people who would consider implementation, but those were not, you know, those were really small groups of people. Like I was on a financing team with Barbara Wingerson and Brian McCartan, and a good group, but pretty small for the implications of what was coming out of the sustainability action plan altogether.
Yeah, so maybe that could be part of our, you know, if we're thinking about guidelines or a structure for working groups, is they need to be sizable enough that you have enough people to actually sort of meet all the needs to get that work done.
Yeah, and what the work can be like cycled through maybe ESC enough cups, maybe another like entity or like a working team formed across them or something for implementation purposes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, great suggestions. All right, next one, Damon. All right, so I was trying to just put, you know, what would working groups examples look like for us? And because we're, you know, getting close to, we want to officially kick off updating the SAP in the fall. If we work backwards from there, we're going to be putting out an RFP for a consultant, for some consultant help to run that process and, you know, do some of the thinking behind that process as well this spring. It seems like it would be appropriate to get these working groups in place soon, you know, in the next couple months. I think there's a lot of thinking and expertise that we can do in these working groups that it would just behoove us to get started early, right? Rather than waiting until we have a consultant on board, for example. But that said, I think we also, you know, if our office is sort of trying to lead and facilitate the formation and organization of working groups along with, you know, some co-leads, we couldn't do all 12 committees at once. So this is also what UC did. They did like 3 committees at a time, or 3 working group topic area committees at a time. And they called them sprint committees. And like I said, they met for however many months, but they met weekly or every other week, depending on who you're talking about, for a couple months until they really felt like they had targets set, strategies and actions and deliverables most of the way, you know, outlined. And I think that will help us have a better outcome with our sustainability action plan. So nothing super different from the models, the 2 examples that I showed you. And then again, we just would want to make sure that these working groups are rolling up into our quarterly meetings with this committee and providing some overview on the progress they're making, talking with the committee members about obstacles or roadblocks that they're hitting, and generally asking for input as we move things along. So simple example. Forget if I have any other slides or if the next one is just discussion. Oh yeah, okay. So if I really had to summarize what I'm proposing, it's that we shake up our governance structure for this committee a little bit. We move to quarterly meetings for the committee. That would be about a month before the ESC meetings. We would form these new topic area working groups that would report up to this committee quarterly. And in preparation for that, I think this committee would be establishing some of those guidelines and expectations for working groups, just so that we're not forming them and saying, you're brand new to all of this. Perhaps, you know, some people might be well steeped in both of these committees, or the ESC and the EC, but some people might be brand new and they're experts on, you know, compostable packaging, who knows? So I think we want to have some structure for them. And then that we would be doing a sprint format. for some period of time. Revving our engines, I guess, as we gear up to do the plan. So that's really, I'm using this as sort of a, here's the spaghetti on the wall. Suggestions, thoughts. What do people think? Dave, you got your hand up.
There we go. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, no, I think this is awesome. So great job. My question is, the working groups and like from a project structure, we set up a lot of, like for the energy side of things, we have our PEC and then all these working teams. And, in the case of the energy renewal, we have like 5 working teams that are already meeting every week. And so what's your thought of how we sort of reconcile the governance of the project delivery with the governance of the reporting back through the sustainability action plan?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, and you're talking about the project groups for the steam plant, which are extensive. So it's almost like you're a subset of, an energy and decarbonization topical working group. And I don't know, you're a little bit of an anomaly in that you're already further along this path
Sure.
than some of
Sure.
the other groups. But I think we could, have you as the representative, deliver a similar type of progress report as part of that working group. But I don't think we'd want to be careful not to duplicate and, duplicate what you've already got in place.
Yeah, I would agree. Just for what it's worth, let's leverage the existing meeting structure on issues that are being pursued already. The CARP and the BURP and ERP, in particular, in this case, the Energy Renewal Program. That's ongoing. The SAP Executive Committee and the CARP structure, those two things ought to complement one another, and they can shift here and there, but I think that's a good comment.
Yeah, it's a tough one, Dave, because the plant is such a behemoth. Jim.
Yeah, I'm thinking about representation on these committees. That's one of the issues we had when we tried to do working groups on some of these, the tasks before, is that if we're trying to think about the 3 campus system, we just don't have the people power to put representatives on all these different working groups at the same time. And so I think one of the things would be to make sure that there's an eye towards, or kind of a mandate to think about sort of different needs of the 3 campuses in the working group. So we don't have to have somebody sort of trying to make it to each of those groups to make sure that they stay on task for all 3 committees. I think that's the concern. I mean, we have a director of facilities who's sitting on this thing, and we have no other staff that can do this. And I do this on my volunteer time. So I think we have to think about how we get representation without expecting that somebody shows up in the room for all of these things that are getting created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point. Yep, I hear you. So maybe we can do a little bit of noodling on different needs, and maybe the Tacoma and Bothell campuses have a different structure. I'm not sure. You're smaller, and maybe we could figure out. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but I hear you. I think we could figure out a different structure that it wouldn't be so burdensome or time consuming.
Okay.
Yeah, Jan.
On that note, I was just going to say, there's still the potential to outreach to faculty for a lot of those roles. So maybe the faculty on the Bothell campus, faculty on the Tacoma campus. So maybe the structure there is just like there's those faculty members who serve on these working groups from Bothell and Tacoma to represent Bothell and Tacoma in the different working groups, have a meetup with the director of facilities for each of those campuses, just to make sure that whatever they're saying about Bothell and Tacoma resonates with the director of facilities for each of those campuses. I mean, it could be a lighter touch in terms of the staff load. But I think it's fair to ask, whether faculty would be willing to contribute to something like that would improve their backyard.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Jan. Erin.
I think these are great ideas to get a enormous amount of work done, right? And I'm just hoping, I know my bandwidth to serve on working groups is probably not real high, right, in this area. And so, as well as even a lot of people who work on my team and across in our department. And so I'm just wondering, I feel like, and probably some folks on this call as well, like, is there going to be an expectation of like how many of these we are involved in, or
Yeah, I think it's, I appreciate the question, because I know everybody's, or a lot of people feel like their plate is totally full. I think we would, want to, depending on what we're talking about, what topic area it is, figure out, is it really a very, is this something that ICA, if we're talking about waste, that would be, a pretty important working group for someone from athletics, a representative from athletics to be on. I think if it's, a working group with a less direct tie to, some of where your biggest impacts are in athletics, I don't necessarily think we'd need to have someone that's a representative there. I think we could also think creatively about, are there students that we could recruit to help fill some of those gaps? We've got a ton of really smart, really eager students. There's a continuity challenge there as students' class schedules change and graduate, but I think that's something that we could also try to navigate, as long as they're, talking to you, Erin, or talking to Karen, and providing updates if you all don't have the bandwidth to join, for example.
Thanks.
Yeah. Pam.
Yeah, I concur with what folks are saying about it's a sort of feels like a bit of a fresh, approach. I mean, just from a psychology point of view, this concept of doing the sprints is interesting to me, because we've all watched committees, lots of enthusiasm at first, and it begins to wane as, it can wane over time as folks feel like maybe they're not making enough progress, or, just the logistics and leadership of getting a group together, takes half the energy. So I think this idea of sprints is interesting, and maybe it is a bit of a, a step in and a step out as it relates to what groups are going through these sprints and how much time is being asked of folks. But then to be able to see some outcome at the end, then further creates more motivation, I think. What isn't clear to me is that issue of sort of leadership, or not leadership, but maybe the planning and logistics, right? Is that come from somebody within the work group, or is that come from your office, or because again, we've all seen groups sort of get weighed down by just trying to schedule a darn meeting,
Yeah. So it's a great question. I can tell you what I've been thinking. I'm not sure if it's I don't know that there's a right answer, but I'm thinking our office would facilitate sort of the initial formation of the working groups. So we might approach, somebody to be, somebody that we know would be a great lead, and then try to identify another co-lead. And then we would help with recruitment. Let's talk about, where would be some logical places to go on the faculty side and the staff side and the student side to get a group together around green building. And then I think from there, our office would, once we have 2 co-leads, we would be as involved as we can be, and I think depending on the topic, I think if it needs stronger facilitation, we can be there to help. But for some of the other topics, I'm hoping that we can also rely on those 2 co-leads to be leading those sprint working groups in some cases, just because we're not big enough to be everywhere. So that's what I had in mind, but I think there's a variety of ways that we could approach it. Okay. Well, it sounds like people are generally open to this idea of doing working groups. Anyone opposed or think it's problematic? Okay.
Can I just add one comment? I've got a text queued up that I'm not going to send in the chat. This is good conversation. Excellent work, Lisa. Thank you for organizing us this way. What we're trying to do here is complement the discussion and the talking that we do from time to time and are doing today on things that we are passionate about. Complement that talking with action. And how do you move to progress and action? And that action will give us an even greater sense of pride in the time we're spending on this stuff. So we need governance, we need participation on working groups in the absence of another way to do it. And I think we're open to other ways, but this is good governance. We want to establish ways to take ideas and implement them into action. So I know everybody's got day jobs and other things to do, but to the extent we can get the right people working on issues and trying to transition into a practical approach to implementation, we're going to have more progress, and it'll remain exciting always, but I think we'll feel a lot better about maybe accelerating progress that we all want to make.
Thanks, Lou. I appreciate that. Okay, well, I am recognizing we got a few minutes left, but I think what I'll do, it sounds like the general consensus is this seems like a good way to go. We got some more work to figure out. So why don't we'll keep the monthly meetings on the calendar, because I think we'll use this time to sort of work on the structure of the working groups, answer a lot of the really great questions that everyone brought up, or try to come up with a strategy to approach some of those questions. And so that would be sort of the first thing, is structuring the groups. And then I think the second piece of work that we do is developing some guidance and expectations to pass on to those working groups once they're formed. So does that sound good
Lisa,
to everybody?
Lisa, I was also going to mention that probably maybe for the end of this year, because we've got the probably a new planning cycle for the Sustainability Action Plan coming up. This group, the monthly meetings might be helpful for the short term, the end of this year, just to kind of for this group to help give feedback on kind of what that planning process can look like. And also we're going to have a new staff member that's coming in that's kind of going to be tasked with taking over that. So I think that at least for the next few months, that monthly cycle will still be helpful as we kind of get that, both thinking about the working groups and the larger planning process.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Damon. Good point. Yeah. So we'll have time for everyone to read and comment on the draft RFP, which we've been working on. And that doesn't provide a specific structure to the plan, but it will outline, what do we want out of this plan? The structure and all of that will be part of the discovery process once we get a consultant on board and our new staff member. Okay. Well, I'm going to give everybody gets 4 minutes back of your day. Thanks. And we will see you in a month.
Thanks.